plants, you see the quality.
Our podcast series, Welcome to the Future, starts now.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Welcome to the Future. And on today's episode, we have a few special guests sitting in with us. I want to kick it off with the usual resident you may see often, Mr. Mike Howard, sitting across from me. He'll be to your left. Yeah, to your left. Up next, we have Mr. Jeremy Eunice. And then last but certainly not least, we have sitting in with us from upstate New York, Syracuse to be exact. Well, you flew out of Syracuse, but you're from Ithaca, which if you've seen a couple movies, I think Road Trip, you know about Ithaca where they went upstate. So without further ado, give it up for Mr. Armando Suarez sitting in with us. No claps in the studio? Okay. Okay, great. We'll add some claps. But welcome, Armando. Thanks for sitting in with us, man. It's a pleasure.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for seeing me.
When was the last time you've been to Vegas?
That was 4 years ago, probably at the last pre-COVID MJ Biz. Yes.
Wow, we got to fix that.
Ago.
4 years ago is a while.
Pre-COVID MJ Biz.
Right.
Away from
Right.
memory
And then if you
banks.
do pre-MJ Biz, that's 3-4, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I went for 4 years back into the vegetable market,
Nice. Okay.
where we basically had our beginnings. It's been an interesting journey where the hydroponic was like completely something unknown 20 years ago, and now it's like the normal thing for pretty much everybody to do. But at that time, it was either you were on the dark side of the force, somewhere in LA or in Orange County, or you were doing the vegetables. I choose the vegetables, and that has been my day job for a long time.
Nice.
And well, now it turns out there's a lot of overlaps between the two. So let's see if we can learn from each other.
Right.
Yeah. Before we
For
jump
sure.
into that, do you want to give us kind of your background, just in general, education, kind of your experience in the veggie market?
So I landed in a greenhouse when I was 15 in France, of all places. After that, I actually went to school for this, into agronomy, and graduated with agricultural engineering from University of Arizona, of all praise. And at that time, it was really special to be like, the program was brand new actually in U of A. All those professors were from New Jersey and from Ohio, because funnily enough, it may not be known to everybody, but the US had a long greenhouse tradition since the 50s, and all that industry died down in the 70s and 80s with the previous energy crisis. And basically that industry died down until essentially the late 90s, early 2000s, and pot brought a whole renewed energy into it, where now even the lettuce guys are doing awesome.
Right. True.
Who's doing better, the lettuce or tomato
Right.
guys?
What
in
did you
cannabis
say?
right now?
The lettuce guys are doing
Yeah.
the tomato guys are not really grown any or much in the past 20 years. So in 2000, back in 2005, there'd been a 300-acre greenhouse built in Arizona. They burned so much money into it, and it burned the entire industry for a long while. And you see, those things are cyclical. Like every 15 years, they come back. They discover new technology, they make it work, then it becomes too expensive, then blah, 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 and it goes around. And funnily enough, I think the cannabis market will follow a very similar path where cycles of renewal are burned out. Right now, I think the industry is a little bit overbuilt. Yeah. I don't know if you guys.
Well, you're seeing that, right?
And it's just one of those where you will see consolidations. The mom and pops will survive. They will keep doing special stuff. The big guys are going to become bigger, and well, basically following pretty much the same cycle than every other crop, every other industry, everywhere else. So I hope we don't lose the nice culture and the nice ambiance from the cannabis industry, because that's what makes it actually very pleasant to work with.
Yeah,
Right.
it's one thing we might be able to learn from the French is
for sure.
keeping that niche with their things. We just have to name whole towns after what we're good at, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Well,
This is OG Kush now. This is the only place you can grow OG Kush.
you know,
Right there.
a few months ago, I did a trip to Sonoma, and we were visiting the wine industry. It's like, oh my gosh, this is a shoe-in for the cannabis industry, where marketing wise, you could have busloads of people
Yeah.
going around to nice places, pleasant places, have a nice stinky cheese, have a nice have a nice cup of wine, and a nice blunt to go with it.
Right. That's true. Weed and wine.
Mm-hmm.
Why not?
Nice. How have you seen the market kind of, you went over kind of cycles. How was the first kind of transition when people started growing commercially? How did you see that transition kind of take place? Like, did you see it really, taking off, becoming a thing? Growers from lettuce and tomato field kind of switching over.
Into cannabis,
Yeah.
none of them switched.
None of them switched. They're all still doing the same thing.
So what happened, for example, is when the guys in Canada went federally legal, a lot of the tomato guys that had been struggling for years now, they just say, well, the hell with this. Instead of making $500,000 a year sales with this giant greenhouse, I might as well sell the greenhouse to one of those LPs, they call them in Canada, instead of the MSOs are called LPs in Canada, licensed producers. And so let's sell them to LPs, and they retrofit. They drop a bunch of money into facilities that were 1 million square foot, 2 million square foot, 3 million square foot. And it's like you start running the numbers, and it's like there's so much market for so much pot. It's like wow. It's like, and you run your calculator, and it's really a straightforward napkin calculation. It's like, no, this is 300, 400, 500% of our capacity. It's like there's not that much pot smokers in the continent. What are they going to do with so much pot? And you see the market exploding because the vegetable facilities are gigantic. There's 3,000, 5,000 acres of installed tomatoes in Canada only. The pot market, if you put it in perspective, it's considered a postage stamp in the agriculture world. It looks very big because it's a lot of dollars, and yes, it's fantastic because there's no crop out there that is thousands of dollars a pound. But when you calculate by square footage or by acres, it's tiny. It's teeny tiny. It's 900 acres of extrapolation on the legal market for the United States. Just in Canada, many LPs already had 1,000 acres just by themselves. So that's where you could see that the cycle, they got into overshoot really quickly. The US market has luckily been like separated by states. So in that way, it's kind of a situation that sucks, but it doesn't suck that bad. It has prevented that terrible overshoot.
Yeah. Well, and every state's doing it a little bit different too. So we can kind of see what's working, what's not working.
Correct.
Hopefully that helps people make educated policy decisions in the future. Will it? We don't know, because you kind of seem back and forth, but hopefully.
Export. I mean,
Well, that's a lot of these people's big play too, right? I mean, it's going to be to export once the European markets open up too.
Israel.
Yeah.
I have a big demand from Israel.
You've done you worked for Grodan for quite a bit of time.
Yes, I had the opportunity to went to start growing for Grodan in 2005.
Okay.
And I was at Grodan for almost 3 years then. And then I went on a long hiatus, long vacation from Grodan. Precisely because in 2007, 2008, the bottom of the market, like the tomato market crapped out.
Yep.
So I came back to Grodan in 2014. That was great, right for the beginning of the cannabis explosion.
Right.
It's been a great ride, man.
Yeah. So we were at a class, Jared and I, over with Ramsey, Josh Newlinger, a few other guys. You were quoted as the crop steering godfather.
Right.
Can you kind of go over?
Wow.
I think those were his little words. We would
The
say exactly what it
Godfather.
was, but we can't get the recording yet. So once we get that recording, we'll go ahead and we'll go over exactly what he said. But can you kind of go over your interaction with them and kind of all of that? Just to drop a bomb on that.
That's been a good one. So the background of this story is that crop steering discussion started in tomatoes about 40 years ago. Because in tomatoes, you actually need to keep a plant growing for between 10 and 13 months in the greenhouse. And every 8-10 days, you're going to put out 4 or 5 flowers of tomatoes. So you grow 3 leaves and 1 flower cluster. 3 leaves and 1 flower cluster. But if the leaves get too big, if they're too green, if they're too vegetative, the tomatoes get small. If the tomatoes get too big, the leaves get weak. So every day in tomatoes is a struggle to keep the plant in balance, to not produce too many leaves and not produce too many tomatoes. Because if you mess up, your plant dies and you need to start all over again, and it takes about 2 months to rebound from the problem. So that's where all that crop steering comes from. So in tomatoes, there's a bunch of techniques that consist in manipulating how many irrigations you do, how hot, how dry, how much light you put on your crop. And what I did in 2005 was essentially translate this. So this works in tomatoes, this works in peppers, this works in cucumbers. Could it work for the indoor grower? At that point, the indoor grower was was the forbidden word. He who must not be named.
Definitely not.
And it was. Those tomato growers. Yeah,
Right.
those
Tomato growers, yeah.
So so it was. Could it work for other crops? Yes, it absolutely works for other crops. So we start trying to write techniques. Basically, it was just copy paste the tomato techniques into the cannabis book, and let's see if it works. And in some instances, hey, look at that, it actually works. So that's where it all started. So now there's a bunch of books since then that have been written into plant empowerment and DLI, and there's other crops that have come online that nobody was talking about 15, 20 years ago. Lettuce being one of them, that now all the vertical farms want to grow lettuce and herbs and a bunch of things. And a lot of new techniques have been developing, and observing the cross-pollination between all those have been a really rewarding thing. And that crop steering really took off. When was that? Like in 2016, 2017.
You started hearing about it.
Then Grodan released a new product line that was allowing you to re-wet the block much more easily. So if you made a mistake and let the thing dry too far, you were able to re-wet the whole thing very easily with drippers. That was not possible before. The wetting agents didn't allow you to do that. And by allowing you to have a very wide range of watering possibilities, you could actually make the plant do things that were before that completely random.
Did you ever see the response from your crop steering and your knowledge of that? Did you ever see it being as impactful as it is or as it's been?
That's an awesome question, because
you never really start out to be like, man, I'm going to change the game and really educate. But I think it really talks about your enthusiasm to make sure that you were, obviously you want to set out to be a game changer and innovate. But I think it talks about your innocence in really going to get the best information and feeling like you can share that with people.
Well, I didn't see it as a game changer because, well, this is not working the same as in tomatoes. So in tomatoes is really steering, where you come back,
right?
And if you move too much to the generative side, you come back to the vegetative side, and you have waves like 10-day, 12-day waves where you come back and you play the game of steering for months on end. In cannabis, is you set the direction at the beginning and boom,
right?
So you're steering, but you're only steering once.
Right.
So I never thought it would be like much of a topic of discussion, because it was really just a set at the beginning and it's a race to the end. So it's a different philosophy. Well, in tomato you're running a marathon. In a cannabis is the 100-meter dash.
Right. That's true.
Do you think that the amount of different varieties has an impact on that? I mean, everyone is changing what they're growing in cannabis consistently, right? Tomatoes doesn't have that same constant change, does it? So as far as how you can steer something, if you're having the same tomato time after time.
Well, they don't have the same tomato.
Okay, so how many different, is it the same amount of varieties that you're having within cannabis, or is it similar? Or?
It's a transformation the cannabis industry has not gone through yet.
Okay.
In most other crops, let's take tomato. Well, let's take a more similar crop.
There's not as many new varieties coming out, I should say, right? Because I mean,
no, it's first, that process is more centralized. So you have just a handful of seed companies that have over the years done a very, very extensive work of standardization of varieties
and how they're supposed to be grown, right?
Well, it's basically in cannabis they always tell you this is a 56-day variety, it's a 70-day variety, but it's in the tomato market or in the potato market or in the lettuce market, they tell you 56 days. It's 56 days to the fucking hour. It's like the thing is going to put 8.5 inches in 56 days, and it's like right on the money. And if you're not right on the money, you grew it wrong. You did something wrong with the growing. So that's a level of standardization that it still needs to happen. And it still needs to be companies like, well, you've probably heard of Monsanto, Monsanto. The big devil of the corn. Right. Well, the big devil of the corn is the big devil of the corn because they do pheno hunts on 5 million individuals.
Crazy.
They don't do pheno hunts on 50 seeds.
Let's say we're doing 50.
So
maybe 100.
So the cannabis market needs to get to a point where, you have seed companies doing pheno hunts on 50 million individuals, where they have huge machines, have huge setups with conveyor belts, and the plants like carousel in front of high-speed cameras, and it's basically a camera doing the pheno hunt all day long, like separated. You have videos on YouTube where you can actually see a rapid phenotyping, and that's what it is. It's gigantic systems because that's what you need in those crops.
You pointed sorry.
No. Well, another example is the potato market. Most of the potatoes grown come from tissue culture. All that process of selecting the perfect clone and reproducing it in millions of exemplaries is a process done through tissue culture, and that's done in potatoes. And in potatoes, there's a whole gigantic infrastructure that is never talked about, where they have first to have the little cutting, and then they put the cutting in the ground, and then that cutting makes potatoes that are about half an inch across. And then the following year, they plant those half an inch potatoes, and they make 2-inch potatoes, and so on and so forth, until they get the monster potatoes you find at the supermarket. That's like a process that took several years just to get there.
So is there a guarantee? So when they do that, like, well, obviously it's not manipulating growth to a degree, but it is to a degree because you're just putting it back into the system. Is there a desired growth that they expect to see every year that they replant it?
Yes. In fact, going back to potatoes, there's that weird thing of...
it's predictable at this point now, right?
Well, it's predictable. It's basically they've been doing it for so many years
that's what I was wondering, like,
the industry is very well rounded. They have exactly the numbers they need on those potatoes. Now you can find those little 2-inch potatoes in microwave bags at the supermarket.
I just walked by them yesterday in a little tin foil.
You know, that's actually a problem for the potato industry, because those are their seeds.
So essentially, you're stopping the growth of the bigger potatoes by taking them at such a small.
Correct. But they're doing $5 a pound on the seed, while they're doing 50 cents a pound.
You can take them all. Take them all.
So
Crazy.
they gone through that calculation, but from their logistic supply chain point of view, it's a problem to get rid of those small potatoes, even if they make more money on it.
Now, the other question that I would have is, so I'm thinking of care for your product, right? So obviously with cannabis, it's you see it through all the way to the package. We were just talking about that earlier. Like, after you get your plants, how do you care for them all the way to the customer? How does that vary for you guys with tomatoes and lettuce? What's that?
So cannabis is very nice. Well, cannabis is hard because there's an extensive post-harvest process.
That if you mess up,
Exactly, you're screwed.
And if you mess up, you're screwed.
Yeah.
But at least you're shipping a product that is dry, that is,
true.
in spite of most comments out there, and I'm probably going to get flagged for this, it's a relatively stable, shelf-stable product, where the product is not going to change much in 6 months or a year. Yes.
But as relates to, but then too, as relates to consuming, because I think it depends on the perception. Because is it perishable, non-perishable? Like, is it
correct?
The shelving space, does it lose quality and it make you sick, or does it lose quality?
As long as it's stored in the right conditions, right?
Exactly.
And then on top of that, you're gonna have degradation.
So,
THC to
but
CBN,
it's a dry product, so you have reduced the activity, the decay activity. So it's, again, you have 6 months, or even the short numbers, you have 3 months.
So 6 months is short for Dutch, right? What you're talking about, sometimes they'll cure for.
On some fresh produce out there, you have 3 days.
Yeah. Well, and how many times have you gotten strawberries with mold on them by the time you get them, right?
Or even hops, pelletized hops versus fresh hops to the kettle.
Yeah, but it's not a dried product too, so it's easier to avoid those types of things with storage for.
Problem where you don't see that. Like Armando said, we can keep that. It's pretty shelf stable for the most part.
The one thing I just wanted to hit on is, you said you'll be steering for like 10 days, 12 days, either vegetatively or generatively for tomatoes. For cannabis, you said you kind of want consistency with that irrigation strategy, right?
Correct. Once you set the direction and that the first 2 weeks of flower, you know that your environment is going to be more conductive to vegetative or more conductive to generative. It's mostly all steady state from there.
A manipulation of environment.
Yes, and in fact, the more stable and steady state you can make it. And notice that steady state doesn't mean that the temperature between the day and the night is not changing and the humidity is not varying during the day. It means that it's just stable, that the plant is not suffering any particular stress or any damaging conditions. As long as you do that, if you set correctly the first at the beginning, it's mostly a straight line to the arrival.
Okay.
In tomato, no. In tomato, it's like you have to do that
You're
for
constantly harvesting, right?
for
Versus-
13 months. Yeah, because every 8 days you're going to pull out 4 tomatoes, and then suddenly the plant, boom, puts out some leaves.
Yeah.
And then, you cannot go too vegetative, so you start leaf pruning. But if you leaf prune too much, the tomatoes get too small, and so on and so on and so forth.
Well, and that's another kind of effect on cannabis too, right? I mean, I'm sure you've kind of seen people who overthin
Correct.
their plants, and that's what it's giving the plant a vegetative cue, right? Because you just stripped it so
Well,
much.
no. It would be over-generative. So
To strip it too much?
yeah, if you strip it too much, you're stressing the plant so much that the plant doesn't turn generative. It literally turns suicidal. It's basically it's going to redirect all its energy
Towards producing leaves, all right?
to produce their seeds, to produce the reproductive organ. Remember, for a plant, a stress, a danger of dying is a cue that, I need to produce seeds before I die.
Yeah. So essentially, instead of like regenerating an arm or something, it reproduces
Correct.
the seed so you can reproduce without losing
Correct.
the full.
So if you thin on like day
Because
one
the
of flower,
cycle is going to get broken.
Right. If you don't get the seeds.
Correct.
there's people who thin pretty heavy on day one of flower. If you do that but don't thin hard enough to put it in a state where it's going to start producing seeds, wouldn't it give it a response to grow more leaves on that stage, or does it depend obviously
So
on
if
where you're at in the
if you
cycle as well?
if you leaf prune very heavily on day one of flower,
Yeah.
you're basically whacking them with a very, very hard generative cue at the beginning. So the plant is going to get weakened, but it will have the cue that most of my energy needs to be put in the flowers.
Okay.
So that plant will have a tendency to first not branch much. Well, no, it will branch from the bottom and branch a lot, but not produce many leaves.
Okay. I always thought it was more of a
So now,
vegetative-
if you delay that and it already has built branches, the number of branches will stay low, but the plant will be leafier.
So then in your kind of viewpoint for cannabis, because a lot of people are asking, I mean, it's very cultivar specific, I'm sure,
That too.
is when should you be thinning and how much? And I know that's kind of a loaded question. There's obviously nuances to it, but
There's a lot of nuances.
He's like, that's a setup.
So most of the setups I have experience with are experience with those 56 days varieties that would mostly work in greenhouse and outdoors. And those, most of the time, and by the way, the most powerful cue on steering that you can get is actually a physical damage on the plant. So that's literally your first line. Why it's not the one discussed by Grodan? Because Grodan was recommending the irrigation because it's actually the cheapest to implement, because it's just moving the toggle on the irrigation computer,
yeah.
and then you can make it drier or wetter.
Okay.
But leaf pruning requires a lot of labor. So most of the calculations on steering, on pruning, well, they go against the fact that you need to expend a lot of work to leaf prune.
Yeah.
So you want to reduce them. And the ones that give the most bang for the buck are always that day 21 or day 21, day 42. Because on those 56-day varieties, like it's almost, you give them 2 or 3 weeks to grow, you whack them, and then you give them 2 or 3 weeks to grow, you whack them again, and then you're done.
Yeah.
So it's just one way to spread the number of days, really, more than anything else. And again, you see there that it's probably more due to a scheduling on large facilities. It's more because you want to schedule it, and scheduling a day 21 and a day 42 is like, it's super straightforward.
Yeah.
You can do that on every day of the same week.
So if that's one of the biggest cues as far as kind of how you're steering is plant training, then
Correct.
what would you say is the second? Would it be then humidity?
Would be the environment.
Okay.
But again, you see, there is the second most powerful, but it's also the second most expensive to implement, because now you have an energy expense. Because you either need to heat or to cool, and that incurs an energy expense.
And you were saying before, you can grow great crops with a wide variety of temperatures, right? As long as your VPD is on point. But obviously, when you drop those temperatures...
So I've come to have a very, very controversial view on that. You know what? Cannabis is really tolerant to a wide range of temperatures. And particularly on the high side.
It
can take a lot of high heat, yes. But it's not very tolerant in humidities. The humidity ranges are very, very tight, particularly when you compare to other crops. And that's, for example, where those translations that you can get, like, it's not like you can take a tomato book, read it, and it's like, oh, let's apply everything to cannabis. So, for example, some of the most recent techniques are the plant empowerment, and you're probably going to hear it around.
Yeah, Jeremy made me read it.
The plant empowerment is wonderful. The plant empowerment gets yields that are absolutely astronomical with tomatoes. But how do you feel having a crop where you're going to grow between 93 and 97% relative humidity all through?
Just gotta hire someone from Houston or like Miami, to run those.
Or like from the swamps of like Mississippi somewhere, it's just straight
you put someone
humidity
from Vegas
all the
in
time.
there and we'll die in like 3 days.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Done.
in my case, it would make me very nervous to grow cannabis at those humidities.
Yeah.
It's possible, and here's how it's possible. You need to be at temperatures, stratospheric temperatures. It's like you need to be in the 80s pretty much always.
Yeah.
Or in the early morning, though.
You need to be at 80s or plus always.
But see, in the humid areas, is that 80 with consideration of the humidity, or is that 80 on top of the humidity?
Well, the thing is, you don't want the plants to stress. So plants just react in a certain manner that when it's very humid, they can take a lot of heat. They can take a lot of light too. But it becomes absolutely unlivable for the humans. Like, I challenge you to grow any crop, by the way, not only cannabis, any crop where the temperature is 85 or 95 at 80, 90, 95% humidity.
That's legit Houston.
It's close.
That's pretty
It's
grueling.
very hard to work. The plants are going to be beautiful.
You on the
Yeah,
other
if you're
hand,
growing for extraction only,
right?
boost
You on the other hand.
it.
Yeah, there you're not going to do leaf pruning in that crop.
I did. The other question that I had too is made me think of this last week. I was chatting with somebody. How have you noticed the difference in environments with the humidity in Phoenix? I mean, the lack of humidity in Phoenix, and then being in New York, having a bit more moisture. Like, what have you noticed in between the two environments?
And again, that's where my controversial ideas on temperature come
Right.
from. It's like,
Different systems, right? You need
oh,
different
it's going
things
to be completely different approach, completely different systems, and it will be far more challenging to do it in New York, and because there it's the humidity control that is going to be the main factor. Because in New York, there's some situations where you're going to be in the low 60s. No matter what you do, you ain't gonna have any choice to it. So at those, you have to control the humidity. And humidity become your first and second and third priority.
And humidity is always harder to control at lower temperatures.
Correct.
Big dips
Yeah,
really making a pain in the ass.
But then as soon as it's cold, it like gets that wet, like it gets that damp, wet.
Rises
Yeah,
the
as soon
cooler
as
it gets.
It's instant.
Correct.
The air can't hold as much moisture at lower temperatures, right?
Well, another thing that I think the cannabis growers perceive it as difficult, but it's not necessarily more difficult. It's just that they've been conditioned to grow indoors. So they had slightly better temperature control, slightly better humidity control, but they lived under the illusion that they actually had control. And you see, where are the best growers? The best growers are on the West Coast. They're and because they're indoor, and they're also helped by the outdoor weather. The same grow room in Massachusetts ain't gonna work.
Right. Yeah.
And you're indoor. Heck, the Massachusetts grow room has better insulation.
Right.
But no, it's like many growers live under the illusion that outdoor doesn't matter when you're indoor. Yeah, outdoor matters.
The outside always affects the inside. For sure.
And in a greenhouse, you don't live under that illusion. So you know that your job as a grower is literally every morning you're going to have to sit down, look at the 3 next days of weather forecast, and literally plan for it. Because if you know that there's a storm coming, if you know that there's 3 sunny days in a row, your strategy will need to be adjusted. So you're steering, but you're not steering what you think you're steering.
Yeah.
You're not steering the plant, you're steering the facility.
Yep.
Sure.
To keep the plant as steady as possible.
Yeah, to control the factors you can control.
Yes.
Based on the factors you kind of know are coming.
Correct.
Which are the things you can't control, like
Yeah.
the weather and those things.
Mhm.
What would you say is the future for crop steering as your role? Obviously, you're one that,
Well, we
that's a
just threw
loaded
a bomb into
right.
it,
That's a loaded
Because
question because
there's
I mean,
a lot of cannabis growers who
yeah.
go back and forth between vegetative and generative.
Yeah.
I mean, fucking 5-6 times during a cycle. And right now, you're saying that that's less important than consistency and control of the environment, right?
I
don't wanna
think it's
put- I
more
don't wanna put words in
important.
your mouth.
I think it's more important the consistency.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not that it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
but it's one of those where, you know what, it may not matter like we think it matters. And it's exactly the one where we are not paying attention that comes and bites us in the ass.
Yeah.
And another thing that, where's the future? The future going is that, yeah, you will start seeing more and more greenhouse guys doing cannabis successfully when they start getting the proper tools in place. There will always be a room for the indoor guys, but the cost profile is going to force them into a niche, while outdoor or basically, I'm the first to tell you. Listen, if you asked me that question 7 years ago, by now I would have think that 90% of the market would be outdoor, that indoor would be gone.
Crazy, right?
What happened is that, well, all the vape craze, and like basically the market for extract went to shit, and then we're back to flower.
Right.
That literally has been great.
Right.
It's like it was fantastic, because that prevented the complete and absolute takeover by outdoor crops. Because in outdoor crops, it's like, I'm going to put 50,000 acres. It doesn't matter that I get 1.5% THC.
Right.
It's like, it's 1.5 THC of thousands of tons of products.
We were going through before kind of the difference between HPS and LED, and just like the thresholds that different cultivars of cannabis can take. And there's obviously a big nuance with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's a big variance between that. And kind of figuring it out is not the easiest thing, right? There's a lot of these big studies that are based on hemp or based on something else, right? So taking those over and transitioning it to the market that we're in, indoors, growing high THC varieties, there's a lot of play in it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was kind of cool to talk with you about almost like re-pheno hunting your genetics, right? If you're switching from HPS to LED, your Gelato 33 might look exactly the same. It might look completely different, and it's going to heavily depend on, how much increase in light did you move over to, and a lot of other things, right? So
A lot of other things.
what, like, how do you see that kind of working in this industry? I mean, it seems like, just in my view, people are going to be breeding, for genetics that can take higher light levels while maintaining quality. But with HPS, I mean, typically that topping out point seems to be about 1,000 micromoles, where then heat becomes an issue, right? Those lights are too close to the canopy at those light levels, and heat becomes the negative factor for that. So now that people are able to push past that, do you see people doing that, breeding for higher light levels while still maintaining quality? And where do you see kind of that going?
Well, the problem of that part is that it's still changing. It's still changing.
Always, right?
So I think we're probably stuck with the genetics we have for a while now, while the techniques and the hardware stop evolving faster than it.
Yeah.
On the LED versus HPS, I think what people need to start really looking at it is, again, that's why air temperature is really not that important. If you really want to pay attention to temperature, the temperature that matters is the temperature of the plant.
Yeah.
So leaf temperatures, and does the same light intensity with LEDs and the same light intensity with HPSs have a completely different outcome in leaf temperature? Well, then you adjust the air temperature to compensate.
Just like you were saying before,
For
the
the
greenhouse, if you know 3 days in advance you're going to have
Correct.
a storm, you obviously pivot, right?
Correct.
So what do you see, like a 7 to 10 degree variance typically between HPS and LED?
Bingo. I've seen 7 or 8 degrees Fahrenheit
Okay.
is a good starting point where, and I know it sounds huge.
Yeah. Well, it's scary. And I mean, we have a lot of people transitioning who will then take LED rooms and run them at 73 to 75 degrees, right?
Yeah, that's too hot. That's too cold.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
far too cold.
And then your leaf surface temperature is,
The-
76 degrees or
No,
something like that.
not even. On LED, if you have a room at 73,
It'll go colder
your leaf temperature is 71, 70.
Okay. 2 or 3 degrees colder
Yes.
than ambient.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you really want to have the same thing than the HPS, you will need to get that room at 76, 77, 78
Okay.
to get leaf temperature in the mid 70s.
And then obviously humidity is different, right? To maintain the same VPD. So when we
Correct.
tell people it's typically warmer to run LEDs with a higher
Correct.
humidity, it's because of that.
Now, actually, on this, I would recommend everybody to switch to metric because there's, on the funnily enough,
It's so hard, right? We tried in the 80s with the stop signs, like put it in kilometers and miles per hour. And we're like,
that's the thing on humidity. There's one that is very nice that the tomato guys are using. The greenhouse guys in Europe are no longer using VPD.
Okay.
They're using absolute humidity balances. So, and the nice thing of using absolute humidity, which is literally a weight of water, is like, the cubic meter of air has 18 grams of water. So it's like half an ounce of water per cubic meter, per cubic yard of air. That measurement, if the temperature changes, it's still the same. You still have the same amount of water. So, and if you need to add humidity or remove humidity for the air, now you have a measurement in mass of water.
You don't know.
Think of it like grains.
To remove, grains of the grains of water of the old HPS,
but within these
of the
systems,
old HVAC systems.
Those like dehumidifiers and stuff like that, they're rated at a certain temperature about how much they can remove, right? So then how do you calculate with that temperature variance?
That's the other problem. Those aren't made to grow plants.
Yeah, it's true.
One of the big challenges of HVAC systems is that they are used for temperature control for animal comfort. Now you're adding an actor in the system, which is messing up the HVAC and fighting it all the way because it's adding water to the air while you need to keep it warm, which is... HVACs are not designed for that. If they remove humidity, they're supposed to cool.
Yeah.
While here they need to heat, which you flip the script on the HVAC.
Yeah.
And that's literally, or for the indoor growers, that's literally the most challenging.
What is your viewpoint? Let's just crack this one open as well. Vertical farming.
Ooh.
within multiple crops, from microgreens to cannabis to anything in between. Where do you think it has value? Where do you think it'll be niche? What do you think its longevity is in cannabis?
First, let me define vertical farming.
Please.
So vertical farming are all the techniques that put plants on shelves to basically have several square foot on top of each other. On that one, there's wonderful applications for vertical farming, particularly in everything that is propagation, tissue culture. Every time you have to deal with a small plant, and that includes clones in cannabis. Yeah, go as high as you can. Because if you can automate the system, and the key word there is automation.
Yeah.
Saving the square footage is not what matters. It's saving the labor. So if you can automate the system and then you can have it as high as you can and you have machines moving the stuff around, then it doesn't matter. It's very high, it's very capital intensive, but the whole thing is capital intensive.
Of course.
So there you have a lot of power with small plants. As soon as the plant gets larger than, I'm sorry, a head of lettuce, it's a boondoggle. Because then the logistics of moving shit around.
It's almost impossible to automate at that stage too, right?
Yes, it gets exponentially more expensive to move a bigger plant. And bigger plants break, and bigger plants create taller shells, which create bigger heat differentials between the top shelf and the bottom of the shelf.
Well, and now these environmental battles that we're playing with the HVAC, with dehumidifiers, you're just doubling the amount of these actors in the room, right?
Correct.
So it's like it becomes
No,
that
not
much
only
more
you're
nuanced.
doubling the actors in the room, you're creating stratifications.
Yeah.
So it's in an open room. It's almost impossible to not have 10, 20 degrees difference between the top shelf and the bottom shelf.
But Mr. Armando, it's been a pleasure. Hopefully you will be back really, really soon. Hopefully we can get some literature from you. We can get some of this down on in collaboration with Fohse and see a way that we can kind of disperse this and start making this available, because I think it's a wealth of knowledge here. And I think the way that you disperse it is important, because clearly it's left an impact on our team. They brought it back here and educate us. So
Well, we're
it's a
trying.
pleasure.
We
Right.
always do the
Yeah,
best
trying,
job.
but it
we're,
does.
We're always learning, right?
It does
it's
show
helpful to
that
have people like Armando.
It does show the impact and the accuracy in what you do that people are trying to implement and apply it. So hopefully we get you back again. First, when will you be back? Can we get an answer? When do you think?
What did you book it yet?
No. So it's on me. If it's on me, I can go do that right now. I have my phone here. I can get that figured out within the next few minutes. But
whatever.
Yeah.
Pretty soon.
We won't let him go very far.
Okay. Good. We hope to have you back. Like I say, I want to get this in some literature, even if it's a PDF booklet. You guys give us your feedback and how you would love to see this information packaged and distributed to you guys, because we would love to give more insight and more resources as we continue to speak with Mr. Armando, Mr. Jeremy, and Mr. Mike. So again, thank you for tuning in. We're going to enjoy the rest of this joint here. Mr. Armando, did you have anything else?
Nope.
You're all good? Jeremy, what about you? You feeling good?
I got a lot more.
You got a lot more. What you got?
Don't let him
What's
talk.
there?
This is where everything goes wrong.
What you got? What you got?
Well,
Give him 2 more puffs. You won't be able to say anything like
I wasn't
last time.
talking about a lot more right now.
Oh, okay. Good.
Right now. Okay. Mike,
There's a
anything
lot
left
more
for you?
inside of him.
He has a lot inside that he
Internally,
would like to
that
share.
will come out in some podcast. No, I'm good.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, in the meantime and in between time, again, I hope you've enjoyed yourself with Mr. Armando Suarez, Mr. Mike Howard, Mr. Jeremy Eunice, and again, I'm Leo Wilson, the host of Welcome to the Future. And stay tuned for the rest of the season, because we really, really have some great guests. If you thought season 1 was a treat, season 2 is really, really an upgrade, and we got some treats for you. So enjoy, stay tuned. In the meantime, go to www.fohse.com. You can follow us on Instagram at fohse.inc or at Fohse the Future, and then as well as Fohse on Facebook and then Fohse on LinkedIn. We look forward to hearing from you, and talk soon. Peace out.